Stephanie had guilt. This is what she called her trips from a conference, meeting, or training where she had intimacy with a man who was not her husband. The long drive back was used to deal with the guilt she felt after each such occasion. She hadn't been unfaithful on all her trips. She was careful. Stephanie flirted with men wherever the other employees in her office wanted to drink and dance. She needed a combination of good looks, being married, and therefore less likely to get in trouble, and, more importantly, a plan to meet him in a place that guaranteed as much privacy as possible. Condoms were a must, and she bought several for each trip, throwing away the unused ones before returning home. If an element was missing from the combination, she retired to her room alone. There were always more meetings, trainings, and conferences, usually 3, 4 a year. She never went beyond names. No exchange of phone numbers, no addresses, no detailed personal information, no follow-up meetings, anything to minimize the chances of being caught. Stephanie went over in her mind all the things she was about to lose. First, the love of her wonderful children, ages 10 and 13. They were smart, caring, athletic, and loving. They were typical kids for the most part, but both obeyed their parents and seemed to enjoy family time together. They seemed to love both their mother and father equally. If their parents had separated, it would have made them very sad. One would think that fear for their children's feelings would have made Stephanie less likely to commit adultery. Instead, the severity of the consequences of being caught increased the risk, and thus the titillating effect. The affair didn't have to make sense, it just had to be exciting. Second, she didn't want her husband to find out. She had a lot of guys in college, and she used their sexual prowess as an indicator of future dating. Some of them wanted a serious relationship, but she got bored easily. When her college career came to an end, she was desperate to find a husband. She was ready to settle down. Roger showed up. He was bright, caring, and perfectly at home in the bedroom. It was a matter of time and love for both of them. Their marriage was a success from every angle. There were few quarrels. They shared chores around the house. They planned a budget together and stuck to it. They agreed on when to have children, and they both shared most of the parenting responsibilities. Roger actually had to talk her into having children, but Stephanie was glad when she became a mother. When one had to go away or was sick, the other automatically took over the household duties without complaining. They were the best of friends. Stephanie and Roger enjoyed their sex life. Over the years, they had explored every kind of sexual activity except bondage and similar friction. Sharing or exchanging was not even discussed. They both seemed to believe in traditional marriage, or so it seemed. Stephanie hadn't shown interest in anything more until at one conference, one of her married female colleagues had a rather obvious affair with a man she'd met. Stephanie was curious and sworn to secrecy if her co-worker told her everything. Hearing about the titillating affair, the great sex, and the statement that the tryst would only affect her marriage in a positive way, if at all, Stephanie was hooked. Stephanie, however, waited to see what would happen to her marriage if lightning struck a woman to death. She began to separate her marriage from a possible affair. One didn't have to affect the other. After a couple years, nothing negative had happened with her coworker that Stephanie could notice. Now she began to actively plan. Careful planning. The first 2 times she met, when she had the chance, she hadn't seen fit to take the risk. The next time she met a guy who wasn't affiliated with the training, was married, good-looking, and had a private room. She was very excited and paranoid, but everything went according to plan. Stephanie enjoyed the sex, said goodbye to her man, and went home. Roger didn't seem to suspect a thing once she got home. For weeks, she worried that Roger would somehow find out about it, but that hadn't happened. It was as if the gods were blessing her actions. Since then, Stephanie had become more willing to hunt for an acceptable lover. However, she never went beyond the risky terms. More often than not, she went home without ever experiencing another man, but neither was she punished for watching and lusting. Stephanie worried about her co-workers. They were the ones who might notice something about her that would make them suspect a liaison. She tried to flirt on the same level during every adventure at the bar, regardless of whether or not she was going to be on the take that night. If she had to share a room with a coworker, she would flirt and have a drink on her own, then return to the room when her roommate left. There was no sex on these trips, But the perception among her coworkers was that she drank, flirted, and went to the room by herself even when she didn't have a roommate. She never asked for a single room. When she found herself in one, it happened. The thing she worried about most was Carol. She had been a whore, by her own admission, until she went through the conversion experience at the revival. Since then, she had decided to become the willing conscience of the women at work. She flagged any clothing she deemed too sexy or provocative. Women with naturally good figures were often the object of her criticism, although their husbands or boyfriends saw nothing wrong with it. Good bodies were usually visible regardless of clothing. If Carol went on one of her trips, Stephanie was on the lookout. If Carol went to bed before Stephanie did, Stephanie would bide her time for a while, and if it wasn't too late, she might go hunting. Usually, if Carol went out, Stephanie was left without her. Another problem was Joel. He was a co-worker, one of the few men in this social work office. He was definitely good-looking and had a reputation for having a big tool. He hit on all the eligible and supposedly inappropriate women at work. Joel viewed out-of-town meetings as a time to increase the number of notches on his belt. All things being equal, Stephanie would love to give him a taste. After a few drinks and no better prospects, Stephanie might have considered lowering her terms for the meeting and accepting one of Joel's many offers. But she'd never accepted. It was too risky. Stephanie saw the 73 miles to go sign on the park road. She shifted her thoughts to her last lover. One last erotic memory before she started thinking about home. As usual, the gang went to a bar where they could dance. Stephanie drank, danced, and looked out for prospects. This night there were two of them, and they sat together. After she danced with each of them, they invited her to their table for a drink. She accepted and noted the time. Being with strange men for too long might have piqued the curiosity of her coworkers. Tim and Jim looked interested as they all shared basic but not personal information. Stephanie began to wonder how she could separate one from the other or perhaps have her first threesome. Before she had to choose, Jim said he was heading to the room and wished them a good night. Tim looked a little surprised, but very grateful. After she stopped flirting, she challenged Tim, "Deal with it or shut up." Stephanie handed him a key card for the extra room and asked him to wait 20 minutes after she left her friends. She said, "Make sure there is no one in the hallway when you knock." Stephanie spent about 15 minutes with her coworkers, after which she and a few others decided to call it a night. 20 minutes later, Tim came to her door. Like most men she dated, he was in a big hurry. She slowed him down, controlling the speed at which he removed his clothes. Stephanie redirected his attempts at immediate sex before he realized it was foreplay or no play. Tim was quite large, but Stephanie was no size queen. She was glad she insisted on foreplay. Less than an hour later, she was in bed alone. Half an hour she spent cleaning up all the marks from the condom they had used. Standing in front of the full-length mirror, Stephanie looked for bite marks or hickey marks. Clear. Remembering the details of their session, Stephanie realized she was becoming aroused. It wasn't an unwanted situation, but potentially dangerous, depending on whether she met Roger when she returned home. Sometimes he wanted to get right down to business. Oh well, if she wasn't worried, she could tell Roger that she'd gotten excited at the thought of coming home to him. He'd want to believe it. Stephanie wondered if it was time to stop trying. She knew that the more there were, the more likely she was to make a mistake and get caught. Like any addict, she deluded herself that she could quit at any time, but only if necessary. She believed that her adventures didn't negatively affect her marriage and family because she wanted to believe it. The 23 miles to go sign meant it was time for her to readjust to her role as a faithful wife and devoted mother. She thought about the kids' sports schedules and what transportation would be needed. The kids would leave notes on the refrigerator if they needed something baked for school or if they were in charge of snacks at the next soccer game. Roger will need to be reminded to buy meat for cooking this weekend. It was easy for Stephanie to get carried away with makeup sex for Roger, who had been forced to miss her the last few days. Stephanie carried her suitcase up the porch steps and into the living room. Even though neither Roger's car nor the children were home, she made a phone call just in case. Receiving no answer, Stephanie rolled the suitcase into the laundry room. She quickly put the dirty clothes in the washing machine and started it up. She didn't want any residue left on the clothes. like the smell of cologne. She smiled at the thought of getting away with it again, and Roger would get all the benefits of her good mood today. Going upstairs, she moved her toiletries to her half of the bathroom. When the suitcase was empty, she put it away in the closet. She stopped and looked around the bedroom. Roger had made the bed, which was somewhat unusual. For some reason she couldn't pinpoint, it was somehow out of place. She headed for the children's rooms. To her surprise, their beds were made as well. Stephanie finally decided that her anxious feeling was just residual guilt and moved on to her plans for the evening. She was going to cook one of Roger's favorite dishes, which meant she would have to prepare a second course for the children to eat. Going down to the kitchen, she pulled out all the pots and pans she needed. Placing the first of them on the island, she saw this, and awed. There lay a piece of legal paper and Roger's wedding ring. She picked up the paper as if it were poisonous. In a way, it was. Roger's note said the children were staying with his parents. He was looking for an apartment that would be spacious enough for him and the children. She could expect to be served with a lawsuit in a few days. The note ended by saying that Jim was a fraternity brother and recognized Stephanie even from the scant information she provided about herself. Tim gave Jim a vivid description of Stephanie's actions in the bedroom. Roger would contact her for his attorney's contact information and arrange a time for him and the kids to pick up the clothes. Stephanie whined but didn't cry. She'd long ago made a plan of action in case this got out, but hadn't rehearsed it lately when she'd gotten away with it for so long. The first order of business was to talk to Roger in person. When she did, she would cry. Roger hated to hear her cry, sympathized, and usually gave in to her. She would tell him it was a one-time mistake. Menopause could be blamed for everything. She would apologize and vow never to do it again. Finally, she would use the children as leverage. Children need both parents, and going back and forth between parents would hurt their upbringing and stability. She pulled out a scotch and took a sip before launching into her attack. Roger's phone went to voicemail each time. She left tearful messages asking him to call her until his mailbox was full. When it was time to go to bed, she called his parents. She sobbed again and begged to talk to her babies. Roger's father told her, "Hell no." Stephanie was stunned, for she had never heard him say a harsh word. She tried to object that it was her legal right to talk to them. He replied that he had to see a legal warrant. She asked to speak to Roger. His father said he wasn't home. He was looking at apartments. Stephanie tried one last request. "Please tell my husband that we need to talk and that he shouldn't be spending money on an apartment when that money could go toward things for the kids." She figured it would get to Roger. It took a few days before Roger called her with his lawyer's contact information and asked when he could stop by to get new clothes for himself and the kids. Roger asked where she wanted to be served so as not to embarrass her. She took the opportunity to plead for a private conversation with him. After hearing her story, he would stop this divorce nonsense. Why would he want to separate his family for such a minor reason? All of this was said with sobs. Roger said he would stop by tomorrow and buy more clothes. After he got the clothes, he would have a chance to talk to her. She asked him to make dinner. He said coffee would be fine. As soon as he hung up, Stephanie's tears stopped. She felt she had a chance to turn things in her favor. She worked on her speech. Roger was silent as he gathered clothes from his and the children's bedrooms. After putting them in the car, he returned and sat down at the kitchen table where Stephanie was already drinking coffee, made just the way he liked it. Roger asked her to say one thing first. She agreed. "Do you already have a lawyer? If so, my lawyer should know who it is." "Roger, I haven't sought an attorney yet because I don't believe divorce would be the best solution for our children, you or me. Yes, I cheated. But why? I don't know. I guess I wasn't used to drinking as much as I thought I was. I really don't remember what happened. Maybe they put drugs in my drink. I'm not trying to say it's not my fault that I'm in this position. I'm just saying I was partly out of control because of alcohol and possibly drugs. Think of the kids. I believe I was a good mother. My one-time mistake doesn't hurt my ability to be a mother to them. Separation from their mother and father will hurt them emotionally. Having to pay rent, utilities, etc. For two families will cut into the money we could spend on them. It will hurt them. Do you really want to cause them more pain because of something that happened that has no meaning to them? Do you want them to see you take revenge on their mother? Are you sure that's what you want? I believe I was a good wife, at least until that night. My mistake damaged our marriage, and it's my fault. An event that happened once shouldn't be a permanent, recurring wound to our marriage. All you have to do is forgive me this time. Then you will see that it will never happen again, and all the wonderful things you thought about our marriage and our family before you found out from Jim will come back. I will do anything you ask to restore our marriage, but I won't do anything to make it even more broken than it is now. Stephanie thought her words would elicit the expected reaction from Roger. He pondered her words. She decided to go ahead with it. You and the kids are moving back in. I'll stay in the guest room. Let us remain mother and father while I prove to you that I am worthy of us being husband and wife again. Her monologue probably won Roger over, if only she had kept her mouth shut. Roger, please believe me, they mean nothing to me. I love only you. Roger picked up on that immediately. They? Have you had other men you've slept with? You're pathetic. Bitch. I was going to be nice to you in the divorce, but that's in the past. He stepped out. Stephanie whispered weakly, I just blabbed too much. I meant that he doesn't mean anything to me. This time the tears were real. For the first time, she felt guilty. It was the last time Stephanie would see her family. When Roger went to his lawyer to see how badly he could treat Stephanie in the divorce, he was hit with the reality that no matter what she did, she would get the kids, the house, alimony, child support, and housekeeping plus 50% of their joint assets. She was going to be rewarded for screwing things up. Unless Roger, the kids, and all the money he could muster went to parts unknown. He took his guilt upon himself. However, he felt guilty because he couldn't punish her any more than he had punished her.